Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, and welcome to this webinar on everything you need to know about the 2017 version of the CPA exam. Presenting today will be Liz Kolar, CPA, CGMA, founder of the Surgent CPA Review Program. She'll be providing you with tons of information on what to expect on the upcoming CPA exam changes, how you should prepare, what you should do now in order to be prepared for those changes. So we welcome questions throughout the presentation. There is a question section in your webinar panel. Feel free to submit questions at any time throughout the discussion. We will pause at the end of the webinar this afternoon and address those questions. So feel free to submit as many as you'd like. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Liz, and she will let us know everything we need to know about the 2017 CPA exam. Liz?
Thank you, Valerie. Well, hello, everybody, and I greatly appreciate you spending some time with me today to talk about the upcoming changes to the CPA exam. I have been preparing candidates for this wonderful test for well over 2 decades, seen lots of changes come and go, and you know, I think the changes that we are about to see represent some of the biggest changes that have taken place in the CPA exam since it went from paper and pencil to computerized. So a lot to cover with you today, and I look forward to any questions that you may have. You know, one of the questions that I often get is, why did they decide to change the exam? You know, admittedly, it was hard enough as is, so what was the motivation behind it? Truthfully, the examiners felt somewhat of a disconnect between what the exam was testing and how it was testing knowledge versus what the newly licensed CPA was seeing on the job. So they did an extensive practice analysis, and they talked to partners and people in private accounting, people in state societies, academics, students, and based on that feedback, they decided they needed to adjust the format and adjust the question types on the CPA exam to more appropriately align the exam with the profession. So what the examiners are emphasizing really is a set of skills that a newly licensed CPA, and by that I mean someone on the job 1-2 years, what would they expect to see on the job? They want to make sure the exam remains valid, remains current, and the license process is reliable. So that's really the reasons, represent some of the reasons why they decided to change the CPA exam. Now, one of the most important things that you need to understand is there is a major shift in this whole examination process, shifting away from memorization and more towards critical thinking. So they don't want you simply to regurgitate facts and information. They want you to be able to apply it. So designing the new format, they went to the academic world and took a look at something called Bloom's taxonomy. And the diagram you have in front of you now represents a simple version of Bloom's. At the very lowest level is the remembering and understanding skill. And then one above that is application, and then analysis, and finally evaluation. The current CPA exam tests the lower end of that pyramid, and what the examiners want to do is spread the skills across all 4 levels of the pyramid. Except at the very top, auditing will only test that highest skill of evaluation. So what do these skills mean? You know, remembering and understanding, it seems pretty simple. You know, it's testing your perception and comprehension of knowledge. So if I were to give you examples of some types of questions they might ask, they'd ask you to define things or recall terms or explain something or classify. It's the memorization piece, truly. Now, in the application skill, you're demonstrating your knowledge. And so they may ask you to calculate, you know, bond amortization, or describe what must be disclosed in a particular report. They're moving more towards you adjusting the financial statements and preparing adjusting entries, and even preparing financial statements. The third level skill, which will be new to the exam, is to, and when we're performing analysis, we're looking at relationships between financial reports and data to determine the cause of changes, and to also gather evidence to support inferences that the auditor may make. And so the terms that fall under this skill include comparison, reconciliation, deriving, and detecting. That brings us to the highest level skill, and as I mentioned, audit is only going to be testing this evaluation skill right now. That may change in the future. But in the evaluation skill, you're examining and using your professional judgment to reach conclusions. So terms that would fall under this skill would include conclude, evaluate, verify, and assess. Now, if we look at the exam as it exists today, the current format only tests the first two levels of Bloom's, remembering and understanding and application. You see, it's 50-50. What the examiners are going to do is move away from them remembering, understanding, and place more of an emphasis on those higher level skills. So far, for example, you can see, it's being shrunk. The remembering, understanding level is down to 10 to 20%, much less. Whereas the application is a significant portion. This is the second. So you're going to see questions around the application skill about 50 to 60% of the time. And then the highest analysis will represent 25 to 35% of the tasks that you're asked to perform on the FAR section. If we look at audit, you see that the remembering understanding piece is still a pretty big part, 30 to 40%. And so you're going to recall a lot of information about generally accepted auditing standards, statements on standards for accounting and review engagements, the attestation standards, PCAOB rules, and the professional responsibilities area. Application is 30 to 40, analysis is 15 to 25, and evaluation is the smallest piece at only 5 to 15%. So this is where you might be given forms of evidence and you'll have to conclude whether or not an account balance is misstated. Or you may be given a fact pattern and you'll have to conclude what type of opinion the auditor would express given the particular set of facts that they present in the program. Let's move on to REG now. REG is going to still test a big portion of your remembering and understanding, a lot of tax rules and business law, 25 to 35%. Application is slightly less than what it is now, 35 to 45. You can see analysis is a big part as well, 25 to 35%. And then the last section, business environment and concepts. Business environment and concepts will continue to remember and understand, but at a lower percentage. Application remains close to 50 to 60 percentile, and analysis will be an additional 20 to 30%. So what I want to do now is talk to you about the content itself, what's being tested across those four sections. The first section, FAR, is modified to some extent, but overall, they're not making a lot of changes to the content. In fact, I have good news here when we look at FAR. First, let me explain what it means by blueprint. Currently, the examiners use a content specification outline to tell candidates exactly what they're testing. They're moving to a blueprint, which is a much more detailed document that gives us a lot more information, not only about what they're testing, but also how they're going to test it. So what skill are they going to be testing for different concepts? The examiners identified 600 to 700 tasks in their practice analysis, and they built the blueprint around those tasks. And so for you as a candidate, I don't know how much information you really need in terms of the blueprint. If you rely on a review course, they are going to provide that information for you. But let me just talk about the high points here. Right now, the FAR section has 5 categories. You can see here in going 2017, there will only be 4 major categories tested. Now, within these categories, you're going to see the basics of cash, accounts receivable, inventory, statement of cash flows, preparing a balance sheet, and so forth. And you're going to have, of course, the more challenging topics of bonds and leases and pensions and earnings per share and consolidations. That's all here. But one of the things that they have buried within the blueprint is non-for-profit accounting. Non-for-profit accounting right now is its own category, and instead they're going to move that up in the other first three categories that you see. In non-for-profit accounting, we use accrual accounting, and so there's really no difference between what we would do for profit versus non-profit in terms of accounting. So they decided to embed those rules in the first three areas. I mentioned there's good news, and I think many of you will be really happy about this fact at the bottom. The AICPA has decided to limit the assessment of international financial reporting standards. And this is a major change. Currently, the exam tests IFRS at a pretty detailed level. And what they've concluded is that the newly licensed CPA does not need to know that much information. If you're going to go into a situation in your job where you're going to be exposed to the international financial reporting standards, well, you're going to learn it on the job. But as you get there, the standards may have changed. It seems to be the whole area is in such a flux between what the U.S. is doing and what the international community is doing. So what we're going to do is focus just on the major differences between IFRS and U.S. GAAP, and they're going to test that at the first two levels of skills, so remembering, understanding, and application. So I think that's probably some of the biggest, best news I have for you in the area of FAR. You'll also notice they're going to remove topics from FAR. So we're not going to see much of an addition, but we're going to see some concepts removed. And this list you see in front of you talks about all the concepts that are going to be removed, the concepts that's going to be removed from the 2017 exam. So personal financial statements, liquidation basis financials, joint ventures, investment property, debt with conversion features, deferred compensation arrangements, and also related party transactions. Related party transactions are tested in audit, and they decided they didn't need to test it twice. So they're going to move it out of FAR and just focus on related party transactions in the audit section of the exam. So now let's move on to the audit blueprint. The audit blueprint is also changing. There used to be a separate category for reviews and compilations. They're taking that out, and what they've decided to do is blend the review and compilation standards in with the four categories you see here. So they've decided that the organization of the entire audit exam should follow the U.S. auditing standards that were clarified in 2014. So what does this mean for you? It means that in every one of those areas, you're going to have to understand what you would do across all types of engagements. So what would you do in a public audit? What would you do in a non-public audit? In a review? In a compilation? In an attestation engagement? And so in terms of gaining an understanding, assessing risk, gathering evidence to support your findings or your opinion, it's all going to be aligned that way. So it's a major restructure, but really no new information is added. The only time you have to worry about new information into the audit exam is when new standards are issued. And there are new standards that are coming down the line that you will have to worry about, but I'm not going to focus on that. I'm going to focus on the general exam changes. If you notice bullet point number 2, they're removing the testing of the international auditing standards from the audit section of the exam. That is great news. It was a whole other area that candidates had to know, and I'm quite pleased that they've decided to remove that. It is for the same reasons I discussed with their decision to emphasize IFRS less. Now, ethics and professional responsibilities in the current exam is as the last category. Now it's the first category because they feel it's like one of the most important things you need to know is your ethical and professional responsibilities as it relates to various engagements. So they put that as category 1, and included in this particular area will be the AICPA Code of Conduct and the professional independence requirements across various sectors. So we have the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board, the GAO, and the Department of Labor. So now let's move to REG. REG is the section that tests business law, tax, and ethics as it relates to tax professionals. The categories are remaining the same. However, just like in the other sections, they're moving things around quite a bit. They're de-emphasizing some areas and emphasizing other areas more. What content areas are being removed from reg? Well, they've decided to drop the AI CPA statements on standards for tax services. They're also removing a pretty decent chunk of material from the business law section, taking out documents of title and title transfer as well as negotiable instruments. Another big area they're removing is the federal tax legislative process. They're going to drop due dates and related extensions of time, so you need to know when particular returns need to be filed, as well as they're deleting the statute of limitations. And a rather complicated area, earnings and profits, is also being removed from the reg section. So all in all, I think that's pretty good news for candidates going forward when it comes to the content that's tested on reg. And I also have pretty good news about the content in BEC. I guess it's mixed news, let me be honest. You know, BEC, everybody says, oh, it's the easiest part. And I often wonder why candidates feel that way, because you can see that it tests just so many different unrelated concepts. You have corporate governance, which really is the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, but on the corporate side, not what auditors are expected to do. They'll test the auditor responsibilities under Sarbanes-Oxley in the audit section of the exam. A look at economics. You know, I teach at a college, and I know in my college we teach economics at the freshman level. And so I often wonder, you know, what students can remember, you know, 4 years after they finish, they get the class. What do they remember from economics? It's usually not a lot. And finance, financial management. You probably had at least one semester of finance under your belt. You know, what are they testing there? A lot of ratios, time value, weighted average cost of capital, capital budgeting, IT, a lot of topics in IT that, you know, go beyond what the average student is going to know. And then, of course, operations management incorporates cost and managerial accounting. So I think, you know, why students, if they do struggle with BEC, it's because the concepts are quite unrelated and they're so broad. So where's the good news here? They are removing some content from BEC. So let's talk about that. They're removing internal controls from BEC. I never understood why they decided to incorporate internal controls in this section when internal controls are heavily tested in audit. And they finally concluded that it was a duplication of content. They didn't need to test it twice. They're removing project management, you know, where, you know, I understand it's a very valuable tool. I use it a lot, but, you know, is it something that the newly licensed CPA needs to focus on? Probably not. They're removing the impact of marketing practices on performance and also strategic planning. Now, not all of strategic planning is being removed. The enterprise risk management aspects of it will continue to survive, but other areas are being removed. So overall, I think that's good news. Less content you have to worry about. So let's move now on to the actual format of the exam. Right now, the exam is split. FAR and audit are 4 hours long, and reg and bec are 3 hours. You'll see in 2017 they're giving an additional hour in reg and BEC. Now the order I have listed on the screen here is the order I do recommend you study for the CPA exam. I 100% believe that you should go for FAR first if you can. FAR is the foundation of GAAP. It is everything you need to know as an accountant, and most candidates will tell you it's got the most content that you have to study, so it turns out to feel like it's the hardest part. So, you know, studying for the exam is not a fun process, and I will tell you, when I studied for it, when I started studying for the exam, I was kind of enthusiastic and excited to become a CPA, you know, and then a few months later, I wasn't so enthused. You know, I just wanted the process to be over. So if you start studying with the hardest part, when you have the most enthusiasm and you're eager to become a CPA, you know, you're going to put in the most effort, it makes sense to go for the hardest part. And then as you go down this list, the sections, I think, get easier. BEC is the easiest part, so I recommend starting with the hardest and ending with the easiest. Now, going forward, the AI CPA has told us that they're going to be testing concepts across all 4 sections, so there's going to be integrated content. And they recommend now, especially for the 2017 examinees, to study for FAR first. FAR, how is it going to be tested in audit? Well, as an auditor, you're supposed to know GAAP. And you'll have to look at evidence to determine if the financial statements are presented in conformity with U.S. GAAP. So they can really test any GAAP they want in audit. And so if you've already studied for FAR, audit's going to be a lot easier. BEC has 3 written communication questions. The topics from BEC, those 3 questions, can come from any one of the sections on the exam. It's not simply restricted to just the BEC topic. So if you've already studied across these 3 sections, no matter what they throw at you in the BEC written communication portion, you'll be able to answer it because you've already studied. So that's really why I recommend going in this order. Now, in 2017, the format is changing quite a bit. Currently, there are 4 testlets on the CPA exam. 3 of them are multiple choice testlets, and 1 of them contains the task-based simulation. In 2017, you can see this is a very different structure. There will only be 2 testlets of multiple choice, and you can see the actual number of multiple choice questions. There are going to be 3 testlets of task-based simulation. And for the first time, BEC is going to have task-based simulations. Currently, BEC only has multiple choice and 3 written communication questions. So the introduction of SIMs on BEC is quite a change. Also good news, they're going to give you a 15-minute break during your exam. And that break won't account against you in terms of your time. That is new. Right now, if you take the exam, if you choose to take a break in between any of the testlets, that's when you can take a break. The clock continues to wind. And so any break you take goes against you. And in fact, in 2017, you will also be able to take breaks in between the first and second testlet and in between the third, fourth, and fifth, but those breaks will count against your clock. The 15-minute break right in the middle will not count against you. Also important to note that the written communication questions currently are graded for content. In 2017, they will not be graded for content. They're going to focus simply on your writing skills, so grammar, conciseness, clarity, organization, those will be the issues. And also note that at least one of the TBSs, or the task-based SIMs, in each of the sections of the exam will include elements from the other sections of the exam. So this is where I mentioned the integrated content. At least one of those SIMs will test topics from the other sections. So that in and of itself, I think, makes the exam more challenging than the current version. The weights moving forward are also changing. In FAR, audit, and reg, the current exam weights multiple choice at 60% and TBSs at 40%. You'll see now in 2017, the multiple choice will carry less weight and the task-based simulations will carry the same weight. So it's going to be a 50-50 as opposed to a 60-40 split. BEC is also changing quite a bit. BEC, as I mentioned right now, is all multiple choice, or 85% multiple choice and 15% written communication. In 2017, it's going down to only 50% multiple choice, 35% task-based SIMs, and the written communication will still remain at 15%. 3 questions, that's not changing. So it's this introduction of the task-based simulations, which represents the unknown for BEC, that for candidates may be somewhat concerning. In terms of when you can take the exam, currently the last month of every quarter is referred to as a blackout month, and what that means is you generally cannot sit in the 3rd month of every quarter. You are eligible to take the exam January, February, April, May, July, August, October, November, and most sites are open Monday through Saturday. Some even have Sunday time slots. You can pretty much take the exam anytime during the open windows. Now, because of the exam changes, there has been a rush of candidates trying to get the exam done before the changes go into effect. And if you're on this line and you are eligible to take the exam now, I strongly encourage that you do so, because it will get harder. And there's going to be a time where there's some unknown and some uncertainty. So if you're eligible to take the exam, we have 5 more testing months left. You could actually pass the whole thing before the exam changes, And if you can do that, I strongly encourage that you do. To deal with this increased application number, the AI CPA has opened up the first 10 days of the blackout month through March 2017. So what that means for you right now, typically September is a closed month. You'll be able to test through September 10th. December 2 is a closed month. You'll be able to test through December 10th. And March is typically fully closed, but in March 2017, you'll be able to test through March 10th. But beginning in June 2017, remember the exam is going to change as of April 1, 2017. Beyond that, the blackout months will return, and you will not have these added testing dates available to you. So we'll go back to the traditional calendar of the third month of every quarter being blacked out. There was some hope that they would open those windows permanently, but right now we don't have information to confirm that. That may change in the future. Typically today, when you take the CPA exam, you get your results in 20 days. The process is going to take a lot longer, especially in the first quarter. In April and May of 2017, the examiners are going to hold on to everybody's exam, whoever sits during that period. They're going to grade them all and look at how the country did overall for all examinations taken. And they're not planning to release the scores until August 14th, on and about. It could be a few days before that. So that represents a 10-week delay for candidates. And I know you're probably wondering, well, that's terrible. And yeah, that's not good. That is going to take them that long to grade it. But there is some good news here. They're going to be holding on to the papers and grading them to see how the nation does, to determine if there needs to be a curve. So, you know, they want to maintain that pass rate of 75%, but in order to maintain a certain number of candidates passing, they may need to curve this exam. So I think that's great news for you. You know, if you do have to take a new exam, knowing that there's going to be a curve, and, you know, I definitely expect that there will be candidates who don't do as well because they don't know what to expect in terms of the different types of simulations, and I'll go over that with you in just a minute. So there's some good news there. There will be a quicker turnaround in the second quarter or the third quarter, and then also in the last quarter, October 2nd through December 10th. They'll have the grades back a little bit quicker for you. Some policies are not changing, and there was some talk that, you know, we would see some changes here, but I can tell you right now they're going to keep credit at the 18-month time period. There was talk that they might increase the rolling credit to 24 months, but I can tell you that has not changed. It's still going to be 18 months. So what that means is when you take the first part and you pass it, you have 18 months from the day you take that first part to pass the remaining 3. If you don't pass the remaining 3 within that 18-month window, you lose credit. So each part is valid for 18 months. And if it goes 18 months and 1 day old and you haven't passed the remaining 3, you lose credit for that first part. And you can continue to lose credit if you don't pass the remaining sections. There was also some conversation around the fact that, you know, right now when you take the exam, if you take it, let's say, in the first month of the quarter and you find out the next month that you didn't pass it, you have to wait until the next quarter to take it. There was some talk that they were going to allow candidates to retake a failed part within the same window, and that is not actually worked out. So they're going to continue to carry this policy forward. If you take a part and don't pass it, you have to wait until the next window to take it again. So that may slow your process down. It's something to be mindful in your planning of when you're going to sit for the exam section. If you do happen to take some parts in 2016 or before the exam changes on April 1, 2017, you'll be able to retain that credit. You won't have to retake those sections as long as you pass everything within 18 months. But on April 1, 2017, everyone who takes the exam section is going to be subject to the new exam changes. So there's no grandfathering going in here. Everybody's going to be subject to those changes. Bad news is they're going to expect a slight increase in the exam. They're saying there's a slight increase because of the additional hour that they're adding to Reg and BEC. Exam fees vary by state, so you want to make sure you check with your state board to determine what will the exam fees be going forward for your particular jurisdiction. Right now, the exam uses a spreadsheet tool that is not Excel, and they've told us that they're going to introduce Excel in 2018. So you'll be able to use the functionality of Excel to help solve problems on the exam, which is wonderful news. Just make note here, they're not going to be testing your skills, so the creation of pivot tables, for example. You won't have to do that on the exam. It may be something that's beneficial to your calculation, but they're not going to be testing skills as of now. It's looking forward to 2018. Your additional funds will go towards the user enhancement experience. So they're, in 2018, going to be introducing a more modernized design to the exam, also 23-inch monitors, which I think is wonderful because the screens can be really small and hard to see the information on the screen. And they'll also have enhanced AD support. I want to take some time now and just show you a small sample of each of the types of questions they're going to introduce on the exam. With the exception of one, I won't be able to show you one because we don't have a sample of it yet. Let's take a look at a multiple choice question. This is a simple design of a multiple choice question. When you open up your first testlet, you only get to see the first question. It has 4 choices. You move your mouse over the choice and select your answer. And then you would move your mouse to the right-hand side where it says next and submit that question and move on to the next question. So it's a very straightforward, simple design to use. Here is an example of a current task-based simulation. These are short problems that are at will be in the last 3 testlets of the 2017 exam, and the exam will continue to use this type of format. I say they're short problems because the additional sims that one they've already added called the document review simulation, and then the newest sim called an enhanced test-based simulation will take longer to solve. What you do in a task-based simulation to solve it is you move your mouse over the shaded orange box, you click on it, and if it's a task-based problem, oftentimes they provide a drop-down menu, and you would choose from the drop-down of choices. So if I chose decrease control risk as my answer, I'd move my mouse, I'd highlight it and click on it, and it drops in. I like this format for candidates because, like in the multiple choice question, if you don't know how to answer it, at least you have a choice. You can guess, and that's what you should do. If it's a cell that you have to put in a number, that may be a little more challenging because you have to come up with a number to enter. But when there's a drop-down of choices, you at least have something to pick from. Here is what the new document review simulation looks like. And I've done a webinar on how to solve the audit document review sim from beginning to end. We also have a webinar on how to solve one of the reg simulations, the document review simulations. If you haven't had a chance to join us in that webinar, I strongly encourage you that you do that, because we show you tips and strategies on how to solve this complete problem. But today I just want to show you the look and feel of it. What I think is most concerning for candidates is this is new, and you probably didn't have any exposure of it at the college level, or if you did, it was not a lot because these are new problems. You as a candidate have a lot of information to review. In the real world, what happens is you're on a client and you're asked to do something. You're given a lot of documentation, and you have to review the documentation to come up with your results, and that's what they're asking you to do. You can see across the top here, they have an exhibit tab, and that's where the information is going to reside. And so I will tell you that when you get a document review sim, you are going to be asked to identify where these blue lines are. If the statement in the document is correct, you would leave it as is. If it's incorrect, you're going to have to change it, and they're going to give you choices on how you could change it. So you have to go through the entire problem, review the exhibits, and maybe even authoritative literature to help determine which is the correct answer. But the good news here, I will tell you, is that the answer is there. The answer is in the exhibit. You just have to find it. And so this, if you don't practice, may be overwhelming if you see it for the first time on your actual CPA exam. And I really encourage you to practice these problems before you take the test. They started testing these as of July 1, 2016, so they're out there, they're already on the exam, and going forward they will be in all 4 sections, FAR, Audit, Reg, and Back. So when you move your mouse over the blue line, you either can click on the icon or click on the line itself. A drop-down menu appears and it gives you the choices. So in this particular example, you could select the original text or delete it, and then they give you 4 other options. And you can see this particular entry talks about Edgewater. And so what you would have to do is go into the documents in the Exhibits tab and try to find a document that talks about Edgewater. And just for purposes of today, I decided to do that research for you. And I found there's an email from a CEO, and you can see in the first sentence it says we have agreed on the terms of for the purchase of our office in Edgewater Industrial Estate. So they're purchasing an office building in Edgewater. And you can see the number of documents across the top. You would have to have reviewed all those documents to find this one document. And the answer, tells you exactly, or the document in the first sentence tells you they're buying a building. And so keep it simple. They're buying a building. So I'm going to go back to the question that says, which one talks about the purchase of a building? And if you look at the choices, you see the second one from the bottom says the Edgewater Industrial Estate Purchase Contract. So you just click on that and you select it. Notice that the icon at the top changes from a dash of 3 bars to a check mark. You've answered the question. Now, I probably made it seem really easy, and I know that's the benefit of instruction. That's why we do what we do. You'll have to review the document. So what's my concern is you're going to get lost. You're going to spend too much time on this particular question. So you want to make sure you know the strategy on how to solve it, and you work kind of with speed in mind. You don't want to dilly-dally and chew up your clock too much to solve this particular question. Another simulation question on the exam is a research simulation. This is a typical format. They're simply asking you to find the pronouncement that deals with the topic of the question. So if I just read the first sentence, it's the company's current CEO and CFO were not present during all periods covered by the auditor's report, which citation in the professional standards outlines the auditor's responsibility regarding obtaining a written representation letter from management under these circumstances. So you can see across the top, there's an authoritative literature tab. When I click on that, it gives me the opportunity to type in keywords, and there's even an advanced search feature. So I started with just a written representation letter. And when I typed it in, I got a lot of results. And all I did was scroll down to find the word not present. I did an advanced search for not present. It came up right away. So here is another simulation where the answer is there. You just have to find it. And I encourage candidates to be mindful of the clock. If you get lost and you can't find it exactly, the concern I have for you as a candidate is you'll start to panic, and you can't find it, so you're losing time, and that is the worst thing that can happen to you. So if for some reason you're working in this particular sim and you can't find it exactly, we'll put it to the side and answer the other sim and get it done and then come back. And literally, if you can't find it, I would say just move on, because it's not worth that many points, and you don't want to run out of time on a sim that you could have solved completely because authoritative literature research question. Again, the more you practice this, the better it will be for you. So this is something you definitely want to practice before you take your exam, and the answer is there. You just need it. So what you do is you simply enter the response, and you enter it what particular pronouncement it came from. This was AUC, section 580, and it was in A26. And I just copied the numbers down. That's all they're asking you to do. You don't have to write about it. You don't have to comment on it. You just got to tell them the number. And so you're proving to them you know how to research, which is something we all do on the job. We don't memorize everything. We look it up. Here is a sample for a written communication in BEC. They give you a topic, and in the box where it says to Sky View, you have to type your response. 3 of them will be asked on the BEC question. 1 of them is an experimental question, doesn't count, but you won't know which one that is. And remember going forward that they're not really worried so much about the content of the question. They are looking at your writing skills. So business writing skills are being tested in the BC section. Now I want to move on and give you some important exam tips. And these are tips that I've kind of developed over the years, and I have some information, some insight that I'd like to share with you going forward in the 2017 exam. If you haven't sat for the exam, you've probably heard that it's a hard test, and if you know anybody or you have sat for the exam, there may have been a time in your life when you felt like this particular individual on the screen, ready to pull your hair out. I know when I studied I reached a breaking point, and I remember falling asleep in my book, at 2 o'clock in the morning trying to study. So it is a challenging process, but truthfully, it's very valuable. You're looking at great job opportunities with the credential, a bonus, a raise. You really, the world is yours when you pass this exam, and you move on with your career. It's an entry-level test. It's not a test that you want to take years in life after you become an accountant. You want to take it as close to college graduation as possible, because it really tests knowledge at that level. So preparation is the way to mitigate the stress. When you go into your exam, it's really important that you know that there is a 10-minute timer. And what this means is when you first open your exam, when you activate it, you have 10 minutes to read the instruction screens. The instruction screens give you information about examination policy, copyright information, talks about how to answer questions. If you don't get through those instruction screens within the first 10 minutes, your screen goes dark, and you have failed. Can you believe that? You have failed. That is shocking to me that happens, but you need to know that. So when you get to the exam, you're going to see this screen. You have 10 minutes to read through all these direction screens. My tip is, let me go back, read these directions before you go take your test. Our review course gives you a sample of this. The AI CPA has sample tests that you can take. You can read the directions before you go physically take your real test. Why give up 10 minutes of precious study time? You should do this before you actually physically go take your test. You should know the directions. You should know everything. And when you enter the exam, go through these screens quite rapidly and get to your first question and answer it, and then you have no worries about that 10-minute timer. Really important that you come up with your time strategy. How much time do you plan to spend on the multiple choice questions, and how much time should you spend on the simulations? I'm going to be talking to the 2017 exam, but this is also an important strategy if you're planning on taking the exam before 2017. You can apply what I'm about to tell you as well. First of all, you need to know that the exam is adaptive. What that means is the test, when you open up your first testlet of multiple choice questions, it'll contain questions that are of easy to moderate difficulty. Basically, there are two pools of multiple choice questions the AI-CPA has, a moderate, easy pool, and a hard pool. And your first testlet contains questions that are drawn from the easy, moderate pool. If you do well on that first testlet, your second testlet will contain questions that are of greater difficulty. Easier, moderate questions are worth less than the harder questions. So, you get harder questions, that's actually very good. If the test feels like it's getting harder to you, that means you're doing really well. You'll get a higher score. Now, in the current exam, there are 3 multiple choice testlets. So you could see your first testlet is easy, moderate, your second testlet is hard, and then your third testlet could be really hard. Well, then you're hitting a home run. If your first testlet is moderate, your second testlet is hard, and your third testlet is easy, what that means is you probably didn't do so well on your second testlet. If that happens, you don't want it to mess with your ability to focus and concentrate. Just continue on. You may have just had some really difficult questions. It's also very important that you know that some of the questions don't count. 15 to 20% of the questions asked across all 4 sections of the exam are experimental. They're pretest questions. The AI CPA is testing them out on you to determine if they want to make it a permanent part of the database, would they consider it a moderate question or a hard question. Unfortunately, those are not marked in any way for you to know they don't count. So, keeping that in mind as you attack the multiple choice questions, here's the breakout of the exam format. As you attack these multiple choice questions, what do you do if you come across a question you don't know how to answer it? Well, never leave a question blank on the exam in any section of the exam. The CPA exam is a positively graded exam. It's not a negatively graded exam. So in the multiple choice questions, you have a 25% chance of guessing right. Guess. Never leave it blank. In the sims, if it's a task-based sim, you might have a drop-down menu, so you could guess. Don't leave it blank. The multiple choice, you have about a minute to a minute and a half to answer a question. So if you read a question and you look at it and go, I have no idea how to answer that question, I'm going to tell you to pick your favorite letter and move on as fast as you can. Don't dwell on it, because if you don't know it now, you're not going to know it in 5 minutes, and you could use that 5 minutes towards another question and even a sim where you could get a lot more points. So whether it's A, B, C, or D, pick your favorite letter, guess, move on. I generally tell candidates to shy away from A, unless you are absolutely sure it's A. I don't want to give A a bad name, but the examiners design the questions to try and trick you. And oftentimes, A will be a choice that sounds really good. And a lot of candidates pick it, and then they don't read B, C, and D. But if they had read it carefully, they would have picked a later choice. So don't fall for A right away. If A sounds good, make sure you read the other choices and make sure there's not a better choice in the problem. I know what I'm about to say sounds so silly, but it is so true. When you're in the exam, don't read the questions too quickly. Take your time and read every single word, because sometimes there are words in there that if you read it too quickly, you will not see the word, and it changes the whole question if you miss that word. What are you in a rush for? You've studied so hard and you put so much in, there's no reason to get out of that exam early. So just take your time and read everything very carefully. You also have to be very mindful of the clock. So if you see a multiple choice question and you know it's a really hard one and it's going to take you 10 minutes to solve, what should you do? Should you solve it? I would say no. I'd say guess your best answer and move on, because that's going to take too much time, and it's not worth enough points to maybe hurt your simulation strategy later on in the exam. So what you can do on the multiple choice questions is you can flag them as you go through them, and at the end of the testlet, you can go back to the flagged questions if you want to. But what I strongly encourage candidates to do before they go back into the flagged questions is look at the clock and see, have you exceeded your allotted time for that testlet? And if you're at it or exceeded it, don't go back. Just trust your initial answer and submit the testlet and move on to the next testlet. Because going back and changing an answer, it's going to take too much time, and you may run out of time on the exam. So once you submit a testlet and move on to a subsequent testlet, you can't go back into the submitted testlet. It's closed for good. You can't jump ahead either, so you have no idea what's coming. And so with that in mind, you want to make sure that you keep to your time strategy. You don't exceed too much time in any testlet. It's really important. From the multiple choice scenario, you know the exact number. From the simulation side of things, there's some uncertainty here. In my first column, I identify the different types of simulation questions or task-based simulations you're going to see on the exam. So there's the current task-based sim. I'll call it a regular task-based sim. These typically take 12 to 15 minutes to solve. And currently, in the 2016 version, there are 4, 5, 6 questions that fall into that category. The enhanced test-based sim is the new sim that they're going to be introducing in 2017. These sims are going to be more difficult and will take longer to solve. And what they're going to do is integrate content, give you lots of exhibits and documents to analyze, and expect you to do pretty complicated skills. They're going to be testing the higher order skills that I mentioned. So knowing that, it's quite possible you could have to spend a half an hour doing one of these sims. Good news is you're not going to see all 9 of the sims. They're not going to be like this. Maybe 1 or 2 of them are going to be. So you're going to get a mixture of regular task-based sims in FAR, audit, and reg. This is my best guess. I mean, we don't have this for certain from the CPA, but I'm thinking around 4 regular and 1 or 2 enhanced task-based sims. Reasonable for you to expect that. The document review sim, if you've practiced it a lot, you probably could finish it within 15 minutes. That would be really good. It may take a little longer if it's a more complicated document review sim. And I would expect that you're going to see at least 1, maybe 2, or more on the 2017 exam. The research sim is hopefully faster. It shouldn't take as long to solve, especially if you've practiced it. And right now and going forward, we expect 1, maybe 2. Sometimes I've heard candidates report 2 research sims on FAR, audit, and reg. There will not be a research sim in BEC. And then finally, the written communication, which could take 10 to 15 minutes to solve each. Those will exclusively be only in BEC, and you will get 3 of those. So BEC will have regular task-based sims, enhanced task-based sims, document review sims, and written communication questions in the 2017 exam. So BEC is changing the most, in my opinion. So if you are on this webinar, if you're listening to this webinar and you are eligible to take BEC before the exam changes, I strongly encourage that you do it. Now, I know I said to take it at the end, so I'm violating my own advice, but it's in this unique circumstance when you could probably get this passed before it changes. That would be absolutely one of the parts I tell you to take before it changes. As a thank you for joining me today, I want to let you know about our flashcard app that we have. It contains over 2,200 flashcards across all 4 sections of the exam, and it's free. You can download it at the App Store or on Google Play. Just search for Surgent Exam flashcards. And in your spare time, you can learn some terms and definitions and multiple choice questions, because I know you have nothing else better to do, right? And that's pretty much what I wanted to cover today. So Val, I'm going to turn it over to you and to see if we have any questions from our audience members.
Sure thing, Liz. We have a couple of questions. Somebody mentioned that they had already, listening to your conversation about the changes that are taking place in the various sections, if somebody was already scheduled to take FAR this year, but with the exam changes, it sounded like FAR didn't have as much change going on. Would it be more beneficial for them to change that and wait and take FAR in 2017?
I would say no, and here's my reason. Because of the enhanced task-based sims and the higher order skills that are going to be tested. Right now, the exam is only testing the 2 lowest skills, remembering and understanding an application. In 2017, they're going to be testing the higher order skills, and they're going to introduce this harder sim. So there are going to be a total of 9 sims on FAR. Right now, there are only 7. So if you have the opportunity to take any section in 2016, I strongly encourage that you do. There's no reason to wait until 2017 if you don't have to.
Awesome. Okay. Somebody wanted to know if you could review the changes to the FAR section.
Sure.
I don't know if you may want to jump back to that slide. If you could just kind of review what those changes were going to be made coming up for 2017.
Sure. Let me bring those back. Bear with me. A lot of slides to go through here.
And while Liz is looking for that, just a heads up for everybody, we have recorded this webinar, and we will be sending out a link to the recording to you all.
Okay, so here are the categories of the FAR blueprint for 2017. The categories you see here are also in the current version of the CPA exam, but the current version has a 5th category that's listed non-for-profit accounting. So in 2017, non-for-profit is not going to have its own category. It's instead, the non-for-profit theory is going to be spread out in areas 1, 2, and 3 of what you see on the chart here. So because non-for-profit accounting is accrual-based, they just feel like it belongs in the conceptual framework, select financial statements, accounts, and select transactions. The governmental accounting will be tested separately in that separate area. In addition, one of the most major changes is the reduction of testing on IFRS. They're going to specifically focus on the difference between IFRS and U.S. GAAP, and it's at the lower skill levels of remembering and understanding, as well as application. And then the more detailed changes involve the content that's being removed, and that includes what you see here: personal financial statements, liquidation basis financials, joint ventures, investment property, debt with conversion, features, deferred compensation, and related parties. And of course, that's tested on audit, so they don't want to double test it. Okay.
Great, thanks. We had two questions come in that were very similar, and it kind of spoke to the delay in the score reporting with that first testing window when the changes take effect. So one of the questions posed was stated that with the 10-week delay in scores, how is that going to affect expiration of parts? If that's your last part and it expires in 6 weeks, and you won't know if you need to retake it in time. So do you know if there's anything going to be done for candidates that fall into that time period issue?
I've asked this question of the AI CPA, and the news is not good. I mean, they're basically saying don't fall into the category. So my advice would be to try and pass that last part before the quarter. If you're in that realm where you're eligible to be taking the exam now and it's your last part and it's going to expire in a few weeks, move it up. Don't wait, because yes, that could happen to you.
Great. I know it's sad, but it's so true. So don't delay. And you've mentioned this a couple times, but maybe you can reiterate it. When it comes to the 2017 exam, if you had to choose all the parts, is there any specific parts that you say would be okay to wait till 2017 and take? If you had to push one off, what one would you push off?
Oh, my goodness.
It's a tough question.
Yeah, it's a tough question. It would be unique to you, and I would say it would be the part, other than back, because back you definitely want to take, but the part that you feel the most confident in. So if you're doing taxes every day, and you know it inside out, well, then you probably wouldn't have a problem going forward and postponing taking that test. If you're an auditor and you do auditing every day, that's then on it. It really depends on where you feel the strongest. So whatever part you feel the strongest in, and if you have to postpone it, then that would be the part I'd recommend.
That's good advice, especially knowing that the content itself isn't changing that dramatically. You still have to know everything. It's a matter of maybe having to spend a little longer time taking the test, especially like in reg if you're going from 3 to 4 hours, and having a little bit of additional question types to answer. But that's good advice. That's all of the questions I have. Are there any other last-minute questions anybody would like to submit? And we can touch on that really quickly. I'm not seeing any more come in, Liz.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for spending this time with me. I wish you all the best in your days, and maybe I'll even get to see you in one of our Surgent classes. If you have any concerns or questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. And good luck to you all. Thank you.